Hello and welcome back to another evening of stories, facts, and good company. Tonight we are going deep, and I mean really deep, into one of the longest running, most controversial, and genuinely fascinating shows in the history of television. We're talking about South Park, and what we're going to do tonight is a little different from the usual approach. Instead of telling you the story of the show from start to finish, we're going to wander through it. We're going to pick up facts, weird details, behind-the-scenes stories, and strange little pieces of trivia that even longtime fans might not know about. Some of these are going to be funny, some of them are going to be surprising, a few of them are genuinely kind of unbelievable. But all of them are real, and all of them come from the nearly 3 decades that this bizarre little cartoon has been on the air. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's start at the very beginning. South Park was created by 2 guys named Trey Parker and Matt Stone. And I know that's not exactly breaking news, but the story of how they met and what they were doing before the show existed is one of those origin stories that almost feels too perfect to be true. Trey Parker grew up in a tiny town called Conifer, Colorado. It's about an hour southwest of Denver, up in the mountains, and if you've ever wondered why the fictional town of South Park feels like this isolated little pocket of weirdness surrounded by nothing but mountains and open sky, that's basically where it comes from. That was Trey's childhood. Small town Colorado, cold winters, not a lot to do except get creative and entertain yourself. He went to the University of Colorado Boulder, which is where everything really started. He enrolled as a music major, but he also studied film and Japanese. And already you can kind of see the pieces coming together: music, film, and a fascination with foreign culture and storytelling. Those 3 things basically describe everything South Park would eventually become. Matt Stone, on the other hand, grew up in Littleton, Colorado. He was originally a math major, which is one of those facts that always surprises people. The co-creator of South Park was a math guy, but he ended up taking a film class, partly to make his parents happy and partly because he was curious, and that film class happened to be the same one Trey Parker was in. They met in 1992, and the thing that bonded them immediately was a shared love of Monty Python. Specifically, the absurdist humor, the willingness to be offensive, and the attitude that nothing was too sacred to make fun of. If you watch early South Park episodes and then go back and watch Monty Python sketches, the DNA is obvious. The paper cutout animation style, the willingness to kill characters for a joke, the way authority figures are always the most ridiculous people in the room. All of that traces back to those early conversations between 2 college kids who thought the funniest thing in the world was watching Terry Gilliam's crude little paper animations move across the screen in jerky, deliberately ugly ways. Their first real collaboration was a short film called Jesus vs. Frosty, which they made in 1992 using actual construction paper, literal cutout pieces of paper moved frame by frame under a camera. It took them a long time to make, and the result was rough, really rough. The animation was barely functional. The characters didn't have names yet, but the basic concept was already there. 4 kids in a snowy Colorado town, a crisis involving something absurd. One of the kids dies, and the whole thing has this tone that's somehow both completely juvenile and weirdly smart at the same time. The short featured 4 unnamed boys who looked like early versions of what would become Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny. Frosty the Snowman comes to life and starts threatening the town, and Jesus shows up to save Christmas by fighting him. And yes, one of the kids dies. Even in this very first piece of animation, before the show existed, before anyone had heard of South Park, the running gag of a kid dying was already baked into the concept. That's how fundamental Kenny's death is to the show's identity. It was literally there from day one. They screened Jesus vs. Frosty at the University of Colorado in December 1992, and the response was enthusiastic enough that Parker and Stone knew they were onto something. Not necessarily a television show, not yet, but something, a sensibility, a voice, a way of being funny that felt different from everything else that was out there at the time. Now after college, Trey and Matt didn't immediately become famous. They made a feature film called Cannibal, the musical, in 1993, which was Trey's senior thesis project. It was a musical comedy about Alfred Packer, who was a real historical figure convicted of cannibalism in Colorado in the 1800s. The movie was made on basically no budget. They used real snow, real locations, and a cast of friends and fellow students. And honestly, it's not a bad movie. It's rough around the edges, obviously, but it's genuinely funny in places, and the songs are surprisingly catchy. If you've never seen it, it's worth tracking down just to see what Parker and Stone were capable of, even before South Park existed. But the real turning point came in 1995 when a Fox executive named Brian Graydon paid Parker and Stone somewhere around $1,000 to $2,000 to make a video Christmas card. Graydon wanted something funny he could send to friends during the holidays, and he had seen Jesus vs. Frosty and loved it. So Trey and Matt made a second short called Jesus vs. Santa, also known as The Spirit of Christmas. This one was more polished than the first. The characters were more recognizable. The boys had names now. The jokes were sharper, and the concept was simple but brilliant. Jesus Christ and Santa Claus get into a fistfight over the true meaning of Christmas, and 4 foul-mouthed kids watch it happen and provide commentary. Brian Graydon sent the tape to his friends copied it and sent it to their friends copied it and sent it to more people. And within weeks, that little Christmas short had become one of the very first viral videos in internet history. This was 1995, remember? YouTube didn't exist yet. Social media didn't exist yet. People were passing around physical VHS tapes and early digital files over incredibly slow internet connections. And somehow, despite all of those limitations, the spirit of Christmas spread like wildfire across Hollywood and then across the country. The tape ended up in the hands of executives at Comedy Central, which in 1995 was still a relatively small cable channel looking for original programming that could help it stand out. They saw the short and immediately wanted to meet with Parker and Stone about turning it into a series. And the speed at which everything moved from that point forward is kind of remarkable. Comedy Central ordered a pilot. The pilot was called Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, which tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the tone they were going for. And that pilot became the first episode of South Park, which premiered on August 13th, 1997. Here's a detail that I think is really worth sitting with. That pilot episode was the last one ever made using actual construction paper. Trey and Matt animated it by hand, cutting out pieces of paper and moving them under a camera. And it took them roughly 3 months to complete a single 22-minute episode. After that, they switched to computer animation, using software to replicate the look of construction paper cutouts. The aesthetic stayed the same, that flat, jerky, deliberately crude style. But the process became enormously faster, and that speed would eventually become one of the most important things about the entire show, but we'll get to that soon. When South Park premiered in August 1997, it was an immediate cultural event. The first season drew massive ratings for Comedy Central. The character of Cartman became an instant pop culture icon. "Oh my God, they killed Kenny" became a catchphrase that people who had never even watched the show could quote from memory. T-shirts featuring the 4 boys generated $30 million in sales during just the first season, making them the top-selling specialty shirts in the United States. By the year 2000, total franchise retail sales had already exceeded $250 million. For a show made by 2 guys from Colorado with a deliberately ugly animation style and a talking piece of Christmas poop as a recurring character, that's a pretty extraordinary achievement. And the thing is, none of it happened by accident. Parker and Stone knew exactly what they were doing. They understood that the crude animation and shock humor would get people's attention, but that the actual writing, the satire, the willingness to go after everyone and everything was what would keep people watching. The show was never just about being offensive for the sake of being offensive. It was about using offense as a tool to say things that other shows were too afraid or too polished to say. And that philosophy, that willingness to be the show that goes there, wherever there happens to be on any given week, is what has kept South Park on the air for 28 seasons and counting. The show holds the distinction of being the first weekly television program to be rated TVMA. Before South Park, that rating basically didn't exist on a weekly series. The show created the need for it. And if you think about what television looked like in 1997, that makes perfect sense. The Simpsons was considered edgy at the time. Beavis and Butthead had pushed some boundaries, but nothing on television had ever been quite as relentlessly, unapologetically vulgar and smart at the same time as South Park was from its very first episode. If you're enjoying tonight's deep dive and you want to support the channel, subscribing really does help. It's free, it takes about 2 seconds, and it means I get to keep making these videos for you. But no pressure at all. Let's keep going. So let's talk about one of the most genuinely remarkable things about South Park. And it's something that even people who watch the show regularly don't always fully appreciate. Every single episode of South Park from season 4 onward has been written, animated, voiced, edited, and delivered to Comedy Central in approximately 6 days. 6 days. That's it. From a blank page to a finished broadcast-ready episode of television in less than a week. To put that in perspective, most animated television shows take somewhere between 8 and 9 months to produce a single episode. The Simpsons takes roughly that long. Family Guy is similar. Even relatively simple animated shows need months of lead time because the process of writing scripts, recording voices, drawing storyboards, animating characters, adding sound effects and music, and then editing everything together is enormously complex and time-consuming. Most animation studios have multiple episodes in production simultaneously at different stages of completion, with teams of people working on different episodes at the same time just to keep up with a weekly broadcast schedule. South Park does none of that. They make one episode at a time from scratch in 6 days. The process starts on a Thursday morning. Trey Parker and a small team of writing consultants sit in a room and brainstorm ideas. They talk about what's happening in the news, what's bothering them, what they think is funny or absurd or worth commenting on. By Thursday afternoon or Friday, Parker usually has a rough script drafted. Over the weekend, the script gets refined and the voice recording begins. Parker and Stone do the vast majority of the voices themselves, with Parker voicing Stan, Cartman, Randy Marsh, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Jimmy, Timmy, Clyde, PC Principal, Satan, and dozens of other characters. Stone voices Kyle, Kenny, Butters, Gerald Broflovsky, Craig Tucker, Jimbo, and Jesus, among many others. Between the two of them, they account for probably 70 or 80% of every voice you hear on the show. Once the voices are recorded, the animation team kicks into high gear. About 70 people work on each episode, and during production week, they're pulling 100 to 120-hour weeks. That's not a typo. 100-hour weeks. The animators, editors, and sound engineers essentially live at the studio for the better part of a week, working around the clock to get the episode finished. And the finished episode is transmitted via satellite uplink to Comedy Central on Wednesday, sometimes arriving just hours before the 10 p.m. broadcast. There have been episodes that were literally being uploaded to the satellite while the previous week's episode was still airing. This process was documented in a 2011 documentary called 6 Days to Air, The Making of South Park, which premiered on Comedy Central and followed the production of the season 15 premiere from start to finish. If you've never seen it, I really recommend it. It's fascinating to watch, partly because of how chaotic the process is, and partly because of how calm Trey Parker seems throughout the whole thing. He's clearly stressed, clearly exhausted, clearly running on fumes by Wednesday, but there's also this sense that he thrives on the pressure, that the deadline isn't a limitation but a creative tool. He said in interviews that having only 6 days forces him to go with his gut instinct instead of overthinking things, and that the episodes are better because of it. And here's the thing that really makes this production schedule special. It allows South Park to comment on current events in near real time. While other animated shows are working 8 or 9 months ahead, South Park can see something happen on a Tuesday, write a script about it on Thursday, and have an episode on the air the following Wednesday. That's why South Park was able to air an episode about the 2008 presidential election the night after Election Day. That's why they were able to comment on Osama bin Laden's death within days of it happening. That's why the show has always felt more current and more relevant than other animated comedies, because it literally is more current. It's responding to the world as it happens, not as it happened 9 months ago. The animation software has evolved significantly over the years. In the early seasons, after they moved away from actual construction paper, the team used a combination of Corel Draw and a program called Alias Power Animator, running on Silicon Graphics workstations. These were expensive, specialized machines that were common in professional animation studios at the time. Starting around Season 5, the entire pipeline transitioned to Autodesk Maya, which is still the primary software used today. Modern visual effects are generated using Apple Motion. But the key design decision, the one that has remained consistent from the very first computer-animated episode all the way through to the present, is that everything is designed to look like it was made with construction paper. The characters are flat, the movements are jerky, the backgrounds look like they were cut out of colored paper and glued to a backdrop. All of that is deliberate. All of that is a stylistic choice that connects every episode back to those original shorts that Parker and Stone made in college. The show made the switch to high definition in season 13, which started in 2009. From that point forward, everything has been produced natively in 16 by 9 widescreen at 1080p resolution. But here's a detail that I think is really cool. When the HD switch happened, the production team didn't just leave the older episodes in their original standard definition 4:3 format. They actually went back and re-rendered the entire pre-2009 catalog from archived Maya and Alias Power Animator scene files into full 1080p HD widescreen. So if you go back and watch Season 1 today on Paramount Plus or on the official South Park Studios website, you're not watching the original broadcast version. You're watching a completely re-rendered version that's been rebuilt from the ground up in high definition. The content is the same, but the visual quality is dramatically better than what originally aired. The studio where all of this happens is located in Culver City, California, which is in the Los Angeles area. They were previously based in offices in Westwood before moving to the current South Park Studios facility. And the fictional town of South Park itself is modeled on the real South Park Basin in the Fairplay area in Colorado, which is not far from where Trey Parker grew up. If you ever drive through that part of Colorado, you'll recognize the landscape immediately. Wide open valleys surrounded by mountains, small towns where everybody knows everybody, and this sense of isolation that's both peaceful and a little bit eerie. That's the world the show is built on. One more production detail that I find really interesting. The budget for early episodes was approximately $250,000 to $300,000 per episode, with the pilot being somewhat more expensive due to the construction paper process. The current per episode cost isn't publicly verified, but given that Parker and Stone signed a deal worth $1.5 billion with Paramount Global in July 2025, guaranteeing 50 new episodes at roughly 10 per year through at least 2029 or 2030, it's safe to say the financial scale of the operation has grown considerably since those early days. That $1.5 billion figure makes it one of the most lucrative deals in the history of television animation, and it basically guarantees that South Park will continue to exist for at least another 5 years, if not longer. The production process has not been without its challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted Season 24 significantly, reducing it to just 2 episodes of long-form specials instead of a full season. A power outage delayed the season's 17th premiere back in 2013. And in season 27, which aired in 2025, the production team actually missed their deadline on the 5th episode. They released a public apology that said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Apparently, when you do everything at the last minute, sometimes you don't get it done," which is about the most South Park way imaginable to apologize for being late. There's something really admirable about the fact that after nearly 3 decades, after hundreds of episodes, after becoming enormously wealthy and successful, Parker and Stone are still doing this the hard way. They're still writing every episode themselves. They're still voicing the characters. They're still pulling all-nighters to hit deadlines. They could easily hand the show off to a team of writers and producers and collect royalty checks from a beach somewhere. But they don't. They show up every week and they do the work. And I think that dedication is a big part of why the show has maintained its quality and its voice for as long as it has. It still sounds like Trey and Matt because it still is Trey and Matt. Speaking of voices, let's talk about the cast, because the voice situation on South Park is genuinely one of the strangest and most interesting arrangements in all of television. On most animated television shows, you have a large cast of professional voice actors, each responsible for 1 or maybe 2 characters. The Simpsons has a core cast of 6 voice actors. Family Guy has a similar setup. These are trained performers who have spent years developing their craft, and each one brings something unique to the characters they play. South Park does things completely differently. Trey Parker voices Stan Marsh, Eric Cartman, Randy Marsh, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Jimmy Valmer, Timmy Birch, Clyde Donovan, PC Principal, Satan, and dozens upon dozens of other characters across the show's run. He is credited on over 332 episodes. Matt Stone voices Kyle Broflovsky, Kenny McCormick, Butterscotch, Gerald Broflovsky, Craig Tucker, Jimbo Kern, Jesus Christ, Saddam Hussein, and similarly dozens of others. He's also credited on over 332 episodes. Between the two of them, they voice the vast majority of every male character on the show. And here's the thing that makes it even more impressive. Many of these characters sound completely different from one another. Cartman's whiny, entitled screech sounds nothing like Randy's oblivious dad voice. Kenny's muffled mumbling sounds nothing like Butter's nervous, eager-to-please stammer. If you didn't know better, you'd assume these were all different actors. But the female characters have a very different and honestly quite tragic history when it comes to voice casting. When South Park first launched, virtually all of the female characters were voiced by a woman named Mary Kay Bergman. She voiced Leanne Cartman, Sheila Broflovsky, Sharon Marsh, Wendy Testaberger, Mayor McDaniels, and essentially every other female character who appeared on the show during its first 3 seasons. She was extraordinarily talented and versatile, and she was a critical part of the show's success during those early years. On November 11th, 1999, Mary Kay Bergman died by suicide. She was 38 years old. Her death was devastating to the production team and to everyone who knew her, and it created an immediate practical crisis for the show because she had been voicing so many characters. The team had to figure out how to continue production without her, and they had to do it quickly because the show was in the middle of its 3rd season. Her roles were initially taken over by an actress named Eliza Schneider, who stepped in and assumed most of the female character voices from 1999 through 2003, carrying the show through season 7. After Schneider's departure, the female character roles were split between 2 actresses who have remained with the show ever since. April Stewart took over Sharon Marsh, Leanne Cartman, Wendy Testaberger, and several other characters, and she has appeared in approximately 210 episodes from around 2004 to the present. Mona Marshall took over Sheila Broflovsky, Linda Stotch, and other female roles, appearing in approximately 226 episodes over a similar period. Between the 4 voice actors who currently make up the core cast, Parker, Stone, Stewart, and Marshall, virtually every character on the show is covered. But the supporting voice cast is where things get really interesting. because several of the show's recurring voice performers aren't professional voice actors at all. They're members of the production staff. Adrian Beard, who works as a production supervisor and storyboard artist on the show, voices Tolkien Black and has been doing so for about 78 episodes since roughly season 4. Jennifer Howell, who is a supervising producer, voices B.B. Stevens in about 53 episodes. Vernon Chapman, who serves as a writing consultant, voices Towley in about 22 episodes. John Hansen, a production supervisor, voices Mr. Slave in about 20 episodes. And there's a long-standing tradition that the voices for toddler and kindergarten characters on the show are provided by the small children of the production staff. So when you hear a little kid talking on South Park, there's a decent chance that's literally someone's child who wandered into the recording booth between taking naps. The show did have one major voice cast departure beyond Mary Kay Bergman's death, and it's one of the most well-known behind-the-scenes stories in the history of the show. Isaac Hayes, the legendary soul musician behind the theme from Shaft, voiced the character of Chef from the very first season. Chef was the school cafeteria worker who served as a sort of mentor figure to the boys, dispensing wisdom and singing soulful, often hilariously inappropriate songs. Hayes was brilliant in the role, and Chef became one of the most beloved characters on the show during its first 9 seasons, appearing in approximately 136 to 150 episodes. In early 2006, Hayes departed the show. The publicly stated reason was that he had a severe ideological disagreement with the show's satirical depiction of Scientology in the season 9 episode called Trapped in the Closet. Hayes was a member of Scientology, and while he had apparently been fine with the show mocking Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Mormonism, and basically every other religion on the planet for the previous 8 years, the Scientology episode was where he drew the line. Parker and Stone responded by pointing out, not unreasonably, that Hayes seemed to have no problem with religious satire right up until it was his religion being satirized. The situation got even more complicated after Hayes' departure. His son, Isaac Hayes III, later suggested in a 2016 interview with The Hollywood Reporter that the decision to leave the show may not have been entirely Hayes' own choice, and that representatives from Scientology may have pressured him into quitting. Whatever the full truth of the situation, the result was that Chef was gone, and Parker and Stone dealt with his departure in the most South Park way possible. In the season 10 premiere called The Return of Chef, the character of Chef returns to South Park acting strangely, and the episode reveals that he has been brainwashed by a group called the Super Adventure Club. The dialogue for Chef in that episode was created by splicing together existing recordings from previous seasons, which gives his lines a disjointed, awkward quality that's simultaneously funny and kind of unsettling. By the end of the episode, Chef is killed off in spectacularly graphic fashion. It was Parker and Stone's way of saying goodbye to both the character and the situation, and it remains one of the most memorable episodes in the entire series. Now let's talk about the main 4 boys themselves for a bit, because even though everyone knows who they are, there are some details about how the characters develop that I think are genuinely fascinating. Stan Marsh is generally considered the everyman of the group. He's the character who most often serves as the audience's entry point into whatever insanity is happening in a given episode. He's the one who watches the adults around him do something completely irrational and says what the viewer is thinking. Stan is also widely understood to be a semi-autobiographical stand-in for Trey Parker himself. The character's father, Randy Marsh, started out as a relatively minor recurring character, but has gradually become one of the most prominent characters on the entire show. By season 23, with the introduction of the Tegrity Farm storyline, Randy had essentially become a co-lead alongside the boys, and in many episodes he's the actual main character. Trey Parker has described Randy as the character he has the most fun writing, which makes sense because Randy's whole deal is being a well-meaning but wildly irresponsible middle-aged dad who keeps getting into increasingly absurd situations. And there's clearly a lot of Parker's own personality in there. Kyle Broflovsky is Stan's best friend and often serves as the moral compass of the group. He's Jewish, which has been a consistent source of both conflict and comedy throughout the series, particularly in his interactions with Cartman. Kyle is generally understood to be based on Matt Stone, who is also Jewish and who grew up in a similar suburban Colorado environment. Kyle tends to be the character who cares the most about doing the right thing, which in the world of South Park often makes him the character who suffers the most, because doing the right thing in that universe is almost always punished. Eric Cartman is, by any reasonable measure, one of the greatest fictional villains in the history of television. He's selfish, manipulative, bigoted, cruel, and genuinely dangerous. And he's also one of the funniest characters ever created for any medium. The turning point for Cartman as a character is generally considered to be the season 5 episode Scott Tenorman Must Die, which has a 9.6 rating on IMDb and is widely regarded as the single best episode of the entire series. Without giving away too much for anyone who hasn't seen it, the episode involves Cartman executing an elaborate revenge scheme against an older kid who humiliated him. And the ending reveals that Cartman is capable of things that go far beyond normal childhood cruelty. It's the episode where the show crossed a line with Cartman and never went back. Kenny McCormick is the 4th member of the group, and for the first 5 seasons of the show, his defining characteristic was that he died in almost every single episode, only to reappear alive and well in the next one with no explanation. The running gag was that the other characters would react to his death, someone would shout, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," and then life would continue as normal. In season 5, Kenny was killed off seemingly permanently in an episode called Kenny Dies, where he's diagnosed with a terminal illness. He stayed dead for most of season 6, during which his spot in the group was temporarily filled by Butterscotch and later Tweak. Kenny returned at the end of season 6, and the mystery of how and why he keeps coming back from the dead was eventually given a canonical explanation in season 14 involving supernatural forces. He also has a superhero alter ego called Mysterion that was introduced in season 13. And then there's Butters. Leopold Butters Stotch started out as an unnamed background character in the pilot episode and was gradually developed from around season 3 onward. When Kenny was killed off at the end of season 5, Butters was promoted to fill the 4th spot in the group for most of season 6. And the audience's response to him was so overwhelmingly positive that he essentially became the de facto 5th main character of the show from that point forward. Butters is innocent, naive, endlessly optimistic, and constantly being taken advantage of by Cartman. He might actually be the most emotionally complex character on the show because his innocence isn't played entirely for laughs. There are episodes where Butters' vulnerability and his desperate desire to be liked are genuinely affecting in a way that you wouldn't expect from a show that also features a talking towel, and an episode where the word shit is said 162 uncensored times. If you're still with me, we're just getting started. There is so much more to talk about tonight. Let's keep going. One of the things that makes South Park unique among animated shows is its approach to celebrity guest appearances. Most animated comedies treat guest stars as a big deal. The Simpsons has had hundreds of famous people voice characters over the years, and the guest appearances are often promoted heavily before episodes air. Family Guy does the same thing. It's a standard part of how animated comedies operate. You bring in a famous person, they voice a character, it generates buzz, everybody's happy. South Park takes the opposite approach. When celebrities do appear on the show, they're almost always used in deliberately subversive or demeaning ways. George Clooney's guest appearance on the show consisted entirely of him barking. He voiced Stan's dog Sparky in the first season. That's it, just barking. One of the biggest movie stars in the world, and his contribution to the episode was animal sounds. Jay Leno provided meows for Cartman's cat, again season 1. Henry Winkler, the Fonz himself, grunted as a monster that eats children. Robert Smith from The Cure voiced himself in an episode called Mika Streisand, where he fights a giant robotic Barbara Streisand. Radiohead voiced themselves in the episode Scott Tenorman Must Die. Korn appeared as themselves in Korn's groovy Pirate Ghost Mystery. In more recent seasons, Elon Musk and PewDiePie have both voiced themselves. Brad Paisley made an appearance. Bill Hader didn't just do a guest voice, he actually served as a consultant writer for 16 episodes between 2008 and 2009. And then there's my favorite celebrity guest star story of all. Jerry Seinfeld was offered the voice of Turkey Number 4 in a Thanksgiving episode. Turkey Number 4. Not a main character, not even a named character, just the fourth turkey. And Seinfeld turned it down, which honestly might be the most Jerry Seinfeld thing I've ever heard. The point of all of this is that Parker and Stone have never been impressed by celebrity. They've never needed famous people to make their show interesting, and when they do bring celebrities in, they make it clear that the celebrity is there to serve the show, not the other way around. It's a subtle thing, but it says a lot about the creative philosophy behind South Park. The writing is the star, the comedy is a star. Everything else, including the famous people, is secondary. Now let's talk about the theme song, because the history of the South Park theme is actually way more interesting than you might think. The original theme song was composed and performed by Primus, specifically by Les Claypool, the band's bassist and frontman. The song runs at 144 beats per minute in 4/4 time, and it features a call and response vocal structure between Claypool and the boys. If you grew up watching the show, that theme song is probably burned into your brain in a way that's almost involuntary. You hear the first few notes and you're immediately transported back to whatever era of your life you first started watching. But here's the thing, the theme has gone through at least 6 distinct versions over the course of the show's run. The original version, which aired from season 1 through the middle of season 4, featured the classic call and response vocals. The boys' vocals were actually re-recorded at a higher pitch during season 3, giving them a slightly different sound from the first 2 seasons. Then in the middle of season 4, the theme was completely remixed into a techno breakbeat version by a guy named Paul Robb. The acoustic guitars were replaced with electronic elements, and the whole thing took on this pulsing, energetic feel that was very different from the original. For seasons 6 through 10, the theme shifted again to what fans called the bluegrass version. It had this twangy, country-inspired sound that felt very Colorado. And during season 6, something interesting happened with the lyrics. Kenny had been killed off at the end of season 5, so his usual mumbled lyrics in the theme song were temporarily reassigned to the character Timmy Birch. Starting around season 10, the theme was remixed again into what's known as the Wamola version, which has a heavier rock and metal feel and features Claypool playing a custom electric bass instrument called a Wamola. This version has more or less been the standard theme from that point forward. In season 17, the opening visuals were revamped to use 3D computer animation instead of the traditional 2D style, but the Wamola instrumental was kept. And then in season 25, the theme was re-recorded with a full orchestral arrangement, which also reincorporated uncensored versions of Kenny's lyrics for the first time in years. There have also been special variations for specific episodes. The first 3 Halloween episodes used a distinct Halloween theme. An episode called Basic Cable featured a James Bond-inspired theme. And the pandemic specials and Paramount Plus exclusive events don't use any intro theme at all. I find it kind of beautiful that a show famous for fart jokes and talking poop has put this much thought and creative energy into its theme song. There's a real musicality to everything Parker and Stone do, which makes sense given that Parker started out as a music major. Music has always been central to the show's identity. The very first short film they made, Jesus vs. Frosty, had music in it. The pilot had original songs, and by the time they made the South Park movie in 1999, they had essentially created a full-blown musical. Speaking of music, the show has produced an honestly staggering amount of original songs over its 28 seasons. Trey Parker writes and often performs the songs himself. Early on, Isaac Hayes contributed Chef's signature soulful numbers with the band DVDA, providing musical backing for many of the chef songs in the early seasons. The show's original score was composed by Adam Berry in the early years, and later the scoring duties were taken over by Scott Nickley and Jamie Dunlap starting around 2008. For the theatrical film, Trey Parker teamed up with Mark Shaman, who is a legitimate Hollywood composer with credits on movies like When Harry Met Sally and The American President. Together they wrote the songs and score for South Park. Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, and one of those songs, a number called Blame Canada, was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song, an Oscar nomination for a song from South Park. In 1999, that was genuinely shocking. The movie itself is something we should talk about for a moment. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut was released on June 30th, 1999, distributed by Paramount Pictures domestically and Warner Brothers internationally. It was made on a budget of $21 million, which is modest by Hollywood standards, and it grossed approximately $83.1 million worldwide. It entered the 2001 Guinness Book of World Records for most swearing in an animated film, which is exactly the kind of record you'd expect a South Park movie to hold. But here's what I think a lot of people forget about the movie. It's genuinely good, like really good. The songs are catchy and well-crafted. The story is a sharp satire of censorship and moral panic that's even more relevant today than it was in 1999. The animation is beautiful by South Park standards, and the emotional beats actually land. There's a moment near the end involving Kenny that is unexpectedly moving if you've been watching the show and you've grown attached to these characters. It's the rare movie adaptation of a TV show that actually justifies its own existence, and the Oscar nomination for Blame Canada was well-deserved. Parker and Stone went to the Academy Awards ceremony wearing dresses. Actual dresses, because of course they did, and Blame Canada lost the Oscar to Phil Collins for a song from Tarzan, which South Park later referenced by having Phil Collins appear as a recurring character who carries his Oscar around everywhere, and is impossibly smug about it. That's the South Park way, Park. If something happens to you in real life, it's going to end up on the show eventually. The soundtrack album for the movie was released as a standalone product, as was an earlier album called Chef Aid, the South Park album from 1998. Between the original songs from the show, the movie soundtrack, and the various musical moments scattered across 28 seasons, the total body of original music associated with South Park is genuinely impressive. Parker is, underneath everything else, a songwriter. He approaches comedy with a musician's sense of rhythm and timing, and you can hear it in every episode. The show doesn't just tell jokes, it sings them. There have also been books and publications associated with the franchise. An academic book called South Park and Philosophy was published, which is exactly what it sounds like. A collection of essays by actual philosophers analyzing the show through various philosophical frameworks. Various episode guides and companion books have been released over the years. And South Park has been referenced in other comics and publications, including Big Nate, Foxtrot, Get Fuzzy, and Mad Magazine. There is no official companion podcast for the show, though Parker and Stone have made occasional appearances at Comic-Con panels and other industry events. I want to take a moment here to appreciate something that I think is easy to overlook. Trey Parker and Matt Stone are not just comedians, they're not just animators. They're musicians, filmmakers, songwriters, voice actors, satirists, and businessmen who have been running what is essentially a small creative empire for almost 3 decades. And they've done it while maintaining an almost reckless commitment to saying exactly what they think, regardless of the consequences. That combination of talent and fearlessness is extraordinarily rare, and it's the reason South Park has lasted as long as it has. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really does help, and I appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do it. Now, where were we? Right. Let's talk about some of the specific episodes and moments that have defined this show over the years. So let's get into the controversies. Because if you're going to spend an evening talking about South Park facts, you can't avoid the controversies. They're not side stories. They're not footnotes. They are central to what the show is and what it has always tried to be. South Park has made enemies of some of the most powerful organizations and individuals on the planet. And somehow, against every reasonable expectation, it's still here. That in itself is one of the most remarkable facts about the show. Let's start with Scientology, because the South Park versus Scientology saga is one of the wildest behind-the-scenes stories in television history. In Season 9, Parker and Stone wrote an episode called Trapped in the Closet. The episode featured Stan being identified as a reincarnated Scientology leader. And as part of the plot, the show presented a detailed summary of Scientology's core beliefs, including the story of Xenu, the galactic overlord who allegedly brought billions of aliens to Earth millions of years ago and destroyed them with hydrogen bombs near volcanoes. While this story was being told on screen, a text banner ran along the bottom that simply read, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." That banner became one of the most iconic visual gags in the show's history because it wasn't a joke. It was literally just a factual statement presented without commentary. And the factual statement was so bizarre that it functioned as comedy all by itself. The episode also contained a subplot involving Tom Cruise, who is depicted as literally refusing to come out of a closet. Other characters keep asking him to come out, and he just stays in the closet. The metaphor was not subtle, and the response from Scientology was swift and intense. According to multiple reports, including Stories in the Week and other publications, the Church of Scientology launched an investigation into the personal lives of Trey Parker and Matt Stone, looking for anything that could be used against them. Tom Cruise allegedly threatened Paramount Pictures, the parent company of Comedy Central, saying he would refuse to promote his upcoming film, Mission Impossible 3, if the Scientology episode was allowed to re-air. And in a move that became one of the most talked about aspects of the whole controversy, Parker and Stone responded by changing the credits on the episode. Instead of listing the real names of the writers, voice actors, and production staff, every single credit on the episode read, John Smith. Everyone. Writer, John Smith. Director, John Smith. Voice of Cartman. John Smith. It was their way of saying that if Scientology was going to try to intimidate individuals, they'd make it impossible to tell who was who. And this brings us back to Isaac Hayes and the departure of Chef. Hayes had been with the show since season 1. He was a beloved part of the cast. But he was also a Scientologist, and the Trapped in the Closet episode put him in an impossible position. He left the show in early 2006, and as I mentioned earlier, his character was killed off in the season 10 premiere, in a way that was both darkly funny and obviously pointed. The loss of Chef was real, and it affected the dynamic of the show, but Parker and Stone made it clear that they weren't going to be bullied into silence by any organization, no matter how powerful. Now let's talk about the Catholic Church. In season 9, there was an episode called Bloody Mary that depicted a statue of the Virgin Mary menstruating on Pope Benedict XVI. If that sentence made you wince a little, that was roughly the reaction of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, which is an advocacy organization that monitors media for anti-Catholic content. The Catholic League, led by a guy named Bill Donahue, launched a campaign to have the episode permanently removed from the air. They lobbied Comedy Central directly. They organized boycotts. They did everything they could to pressure the network into pulling the episode. It didn't work. The episode aired, and in New Zealand, where the Catholic League's efforts generated a lot of media attention, the controversy actually had the opposite of its intended effect. The episode drew 6 times its normal viewership in New Zealand because all the publicity had made people curious about what was so offensive. This is a pattern that would repeat itself throughout South Park's history. Controversy drives attention. Attention drives viewership. Viewership drives the show's continued existence. Parker and Stone understood this dynamic intuitively, and they were never afraid to lean into it. While we're on the subject of early controversies, there are a few other moments from the show's first decade that are worth mentioning. In Season 5, an episode called It Hits the Fan featured 162 uncensored uses of the word shit in a single 22-minute episode. That's an average of roughly 1 every 8 seconds. The episode was essentially a satire of censorship itself, using the very thing that censors object to as the mechanism of the comedy. It was provocative, deliberately so, and it generated a lot of attention when it aired in 2001. There was also the controversy around the show's very first season. South Park was so shocking to viewers in 1997 and 1998 that there were parental groups calling for it to be taken off the air almost immediately. The first season finale, a two-parter about Cartman's mom, drew 6.2 to 6.4 million viewers with an 8.2 Nielsen rating, which was enormous for Comedy Central. Those numbers meant that huge numbers of people were watching, including, inevitably, a lot of kids whose parents didn't know what the show actually contained. The merchandise issue made this even more complicated. Remember those $30 million in t-shirts? A lot of those shirts were being worn by children and teenagers who thought Cartman was funny, but whose parents had no idea that the show featured graphic violence, sexual content, and language that went far beyond anything else on television. The Terrence and Phillip situation is another early controversy worth knowing about. At the end of Season 1, the show aired a cliffhanger about who Cartman's father really was. Fans spent the entire hiatus between Seasons 1 and 2 waiting for the answer. And when Season 2 premiered, instead of resolving the cliffhanger, Parker and Stone aired an episode called Terrence and Phillip in Not Without My Anus, which was an entirely separate story featuring the show's fictional Canadian comedians and had nothing to do with the Cartman's father mystery. Fans were furious. Comedy Central's phone lines were overwhelmed with complaints. It was one of the first examples of Parker and Stone deliberately trolling their own audience, and it set a precedent for the kind of creative unpredictability that would define the show going forward. The Cartman's father reveal didn't come until later, and the answer ended up being even more bizarre than anyone had expected. There's also an episode from early in the show's run that I think deserves special mention, even though it's not usually grouped with the big controversies. The very first episode that aired after September 11th, 2001 was a South Park episode. The show was one of the first programs on television to directly address the attacks, and it did so in a way that was characteristically South Park. Irreverent, uncomfortable, and surprisingly thoughtful all at once. The fact that they were able to respond so quickly was a direct result of that 6-day production cycle. While other shows were still figuring out how to address what had happened, South Park had already written, animated, and aired an episode about it. In the aftermath of the attacks, there was a widespread cultural moment of sensitivity and uncertainty about what was appropriate to joke about and what wasn't. South Park essentially answered that question by joking about everything, which was controversial, but also, for a lot of viewers, genuinely cathartic. The show's willingness to treat even the most sensitive subjects as fair game for comedy made it feel essential during a time when a lot of other entertainment felt either tone-deaf or too cautious. The early 2000s were also when the show started to develop its relationship with school shooting commentary, which is a topic that Parker and Stone have returned to multiple times over the years. Given that Matt Stone grew up in Littleton, Colorado, which is the community where the Columbine High School shooting took place in 1999, the subject has always had a personal dimension for the show's creators. The show has never shied away from the topic, and its treatment of gun violence in schools has evolved over the years from more abstract satire to episodes like Put It Down in Season 21, which addressed the subject in a way that felt more direct and more genuinely concerned than some of the earlier attempts. All of these controversies, the Scientology war, the Catholic League boycott, the profanity record, the September 11th response, the school shooting commentary, they all share something in common. In every case, the controversy generated more attention for the show, not less. And in every case, Parker and Stone refused to apologize or back down. That consistency, that unwavering commitment to saying whatever they want to say, regardless of the consequences, is the single thread that runs through every era of South Park's history. It's not always comfortable, it's not always right, but it's always honest, and the audience has rewarded that honesty with nearly 3 decades of loyalty. We're going to get into even bigger controversies in a little bit, including the episodes that are still banned to this day. But first, let's take a detour and talk about something a little lighter. Let's talk about the show's relationship with video games. South Park has had a surprisingly long and varied history with video games, and the quality of those games has ranged from genuinely terrible to legitimately some of the best licensed games ever made. The franchise's first game was simply called South Park, released in 1998 for the Nintendo 64, PlayStation, and PC. It was a first-person shooter made by Acclaim, and it was, to put it charitably, not great. The gameplay was repetitive, the level design was uninspired, and the whole thing felt like a rush job designed to capitalize on the show's popularity rather than create something that was actually fun to play. It sold reasonably well because the South Park name was red hot in 1998, but nobody remembers it fondly. The following year, Acclaim released Chef's Love Shack, which was a trivia and party game for the Dreamcast, PlayStation, Nintendo 64, and PC. It was slightly better received than the first game, but still nothing special. Then in 2000, there was South Park Rally, a racing game in the vein of Mario Kart, which came out on the same platforms. Again, fine but forgettable. There was also a Game Boy Color game that was in development in 1998, but ended up getting canceled. The game was never officially released, but it leaked online in 2014, so if you're curious about what a South Park Game Boy game would have looked like, you can actually find it and play it. There was even a project described as a GTA clone that was developed by a studio called Buzz Monkey Software, but never saw the light of day. A South Park open-world game is one of those ideas that sounds amazing in theory, but apparently never came together in practice. The real turning point for South Park in gaming came much later. In 2009, South Park Let's Go Tower Defense Play was released on Xbox Live Arcade. It was a tower defense game, which is a genre that doesn't sound immediately exciting, but it was well made, and it captured the feel of the show in a way that the earlier games hadn't. Then, in 2012, there was South Park, Tenorman's Revenge, a platformer for Xbox Live Arcade that was decent, but still not quite the definitive South Park gaming experience that fans had been waiting for. That definitive experience finally arrived on March 4th, 2014, with the release of South Park, The Stick of Truth. This was a full-scale role-playing game developed by Obsidian Entertainment, the studio behind games like Fallout, New Vegas, and Pillars of Eternity. And it was made with deep involvement from Parker and Stone themselves. The game looked exactly like the show, not inspired by the show, not in the style of the show. It literally looked like you were playing an episode of South Park. The animation, the character designs, the backgrounds, everything was indistinguishable from the actual television series. Parker and Stone wrote the script and provided the voice acting, and the result was a game that was consistently funny, surprisingly deep as an RPG, and absolutely packed with references to the show's history. The Stick of Truth was a critical and commercial success, and it proved that a South Park game could be genuinely great if the right people were involved. It also generated some controversy of its own. The game was initially banned in Australia due to interactive sequences involving alien anal probing and an abortion minigame. A censored version was eventually released for the Australian, European, and Israeli markets, with the offending scenes replaced by text descriptions of what was happening, which were written by Parker and Stone to be even funnier than the scenes they replaced. The sequel, South Park, The Fractured But Whole, was released on October 17, 2017 for PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. It shifted the setting from a medieval fantasy RPG parody to a superhero parody, with the boys creating their own superhero franchise. The combat system was overhauled to be more tactical, and the writing was once again handled primarily by Parker and Stone. It received strong reviews, though most critics felt it was slightly less surprising than the first game, simply because the novelty of a great South Park game had already been established. There was also South Park: Phone Destroyer, a mobile game released on November the 9th, 2017, which was a card-based strategy game for iOS and Android. And the most recent game, South Park: Snow Day, was released on March 26, 2024 for PC, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X/S. Snow Day was notable for being a 3D co-op game, which was a significant departure from the 2D aesthetic that had defined the previous games. The reception was more mixed, with some fans feeling that the 3D graphics, while technically impressive, lost some of the charm that came from the games looking exactly like the show. If you count everything, the full list of South Park video games includes the original 1998 shooter, Chef's Love Shack, South Park Rally, the canceled Game Boy Color project, the unreleased GTA clone, Let's Go Tower Defense Play, Tennerman's Revenge, The Stick of Truth, a South Park pinball game from 2014, The Fractured But Whole, Phone Destroyer, and Snow Day. That's a surprisingly large library of games for a franchise that's primarily known as a television show. Now I want to circle back to the theatrical film for a moment because there are some additional details about South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, that I think are worth knowing. The film premiered on June 23, 1999, with its wide US release following on June 30th. It was the first and so far only theatrically released South Park film, and it was rated R, which was a whole controversy in itself given how many young South Park fans wanted to see it but couldn't get into theaters without an adult. The irony of a movie about censorship and moral panic being subject to censorship and moral panic was not lost on anyone. The film's entry in the 2001 Guinness Book of World Records for most swearing in an animated film was a point of pride for Parker and Stone. The Oscars nomination for Blame Canada was a surreal moment for everyone involved. The song was performed at the actual Academy Award ceremony by Robin Williams, and Parker and Stone attended the ceremony dressed in replicas of the dresses that Jennifer Lopez and Gwyneth Paltrow had worn to previous ceremonies. They later admitted that they had been on acid during the Oscars, which is one of those facts that sounds made up but has been confirmed in multiple interviews. Beyond the theatrical film, the show has produced a substantial body of extended content. The Imagination Land trilogy from season 11 was later compiled into a direct-to-video movie called Imagination Land. The movie in 2008, which included unseen footage and a director's cut of the 3 episodes merged into a single feature. That movie won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in the 1 hour plus category. Starting in 2021, the show began producing extended specials for Paramount Plus as part of their deal with the streaming service. South Park Post-COVID aired on November 25th, 2021, followed by South Park Post-COVID, The Return of COVID, on December 16th, 2021. Then came The Streaming Wars, Part 1 on June 1st, 2022, and The Streaming Wars Part 2 on July 13th, 2022. Joining the Panderverse debuted on October 27th, 2023. Not Suitable for Children followed on December 20th, 2023. And The End of Obesity was released on May 24th, 2024. These specials run approximately 45 minutes each, which is roughly double the length of a standard episode, and they've generally been well received by fans and critics. They function almost like mini-movies with more time for character development and storytelling than a regular episode allows. The official South Park fan community counts the franchise as including 1 feature film, 2 specials, 2 made-for-TV movies, and 7 shorts as of early 2026. But honestly, the franchise is bigger than those numbers suggest. Between the television series, the theatrical film, the Paramount Plus specials, the video games, the merchandise empire that generated over $250 million by the year 2000, the academic books, and the cultural influence that the show has had on comedy, politics, and public discourse, South Park is one of the most significant entertainment franchises of the last 30 years. And all of it traces back to two guys and a piece of construction paper. There's one more piece of the expanded universe that I want to mention before we move on, and it's something that a lot of South Park fans might not know about. In 2011, a documentary called 6 Days to Air, The Making of South Park, premiered on Comedy Central. I mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the production process, but it deserves its own moment here. The documentary follows the creation of the season 15 premiere from start to finish, and it's one of the most honest and revealing looks behind the scenes of any television show ever made. You see Parker struggling with writer's block. You see the animation team pulling all-nighters. You see the script being rewritten multiple times as the deadline approaches. And you see the final episode being uploaded to the satellite with almost no time to spare. It's stressful to watch, but it's also deeply inspiring because it shows you what it actually looks like when people care about what they're making and refuse to cut corners even when they're exhausted and running out of time. If you're a fan of the show and you haven't seen 6 Days to Air, do yourself a favor and track it down. It will change how you watch every subsequent episode. All right, let's shift gears. We've covered the origins, the production process, the characters, the music, the games, and the early controversies. Now it's time to talk about the big ones, the controversies that nearly destroyed the show, the episodes that are still banned, and the threats that were very, very real. If you ask most South Park fans to name the single most serious controversy in the show's history, they'll almost certainly point to the Muhammad episodes. And they'd be right. Because while the Scientology war was dramatic and the Catholic League boycott was loud, the Muhammad saga involved actual death threats, government security intervention, and episodes that remain banned to this day, more than 15 years after they originally aired. This is the story that proved South Park wasn't just pushing boundaries for entertainment, it was pushing boundaries that had real, dangerous consequences. The story starts in 2001, with a season 5 episode called Super Best Friends. In that episode, religious figures from various faiths team up as a superhero group. The members include Jesus, Buddha, Moses, Krishna, Joseph Smith, Lao Tzu, and Muhammad. Muhammad is depicted as a character with the power to shoot fire. He has lines of dialogue. He's shown on screen without any censorship. And when the episode aired in 2001, nobody cared. Nobody protested. Nobody threatened anyone. Muhammad appeared on screen, people watched the episode, and life went on. That fact is worth sitting with for a moment because it tells you something important about how much the world changed between 2001 and 2006. In 2001, you could show Muhammad on American television and nothing happened. By 2006, the very idea of depicting Muhammad in any visual medium had become one of the most incendiary acts imaginable. The turning point came in 2005 and 2006, when a Danish newspaper published a series of cartoon depictions of Muhammad that sparked worldwide protests, death threats against the cartoonists, and a massive international controversy about the limits of free expression. In the middle of all this, Parker and Stone made a 2-part episode called Cartoon Wars, which aired in season 10. The episodes were partly a satire of Family Guy and partly a direct commentary on the Danish cartoon controversy. The plot involved an upcoming episode of Family Guy that was going to show Muhammad on screen, and the question of whether the network would have the courage to air it. In the original version of Cartoon Wars Part 2, Muhammad was supposed to appear on screen, but Comedy Central refused to allow it. The network censored the depiction, replacing it with a black screen and a text message that read, "Comedy Central has refused to broadcast an image of Muhammad on their network." Parker and Stone were furious. They had been willing to take the risk. The network was not. and the text card that appeared in place of the image became its own kind of statement, one that said more about censorship and cowardice than any actual depiction could have. But the real crisis came 4 years later with episodes 200 and 201, which aired in season 14 in April 2010. These were landmark episodes designed to celebrate the show's 200th episode by bringing back virtually every celebrity and public figure the show had ever lampooned. It was a massive, ambitious undertaking, and at the center of the plot was, once again, the question of whether South Park would depict Muhammad on screen. Episode 200 aired on April 14th, 2010. It featured Muhammad hidden inside a bear costume, which was the show's way of technically showing the character without actually showing him. The episode ended on a cliffhanger, and within days, a radical organization called Revolution Muslim posted a warning on their website directed at Parker and Stone. The post included a graphic image of the murdered Dutch filmmaker Theo van Gogh, who had been killed in 2004 by an Islamic extremist after making a film critical of Islam. The post included the addresses of Comedy Central's offices and South Park studios. It stated that Parker and Stone would probably end up like Theo van Gogh if they continued to depict Muhammad. The response was immediate. The NYPD increased security around Comedy Central's offices in New York. Parker and Stone were provided with security details. The FBI investigated the threat, and when episode 201 aired on April 21st, 2010, it was heavily censored by Comedy Central, far beyond anything Parker and Stone had intended. Not only was Muhammad's image obscured, but Kyle's entire end-of-episode speech, which was about intimidation and the power of threats to silence free expression, was bleeped out completely. The speech had nothing to do with Muhammad specifically. It was a broader statement about the principle of not giving in to threats. But Comedy Central bleeped the entire thing anyway, essentially proving Kyle's point in the most ironic way possible. Parker and Stone released a statement afterward saying, "We do not have network approval to discuss the details of what happened." That statement, with its implication that the network had effectively gagged them, was chilling. Here were two of the most outspoken, fearless voices in American entertainment, and they were being told they couldn't even talk about what had been done to their own work. The aftermath of the 200 and 201 controversy was significant. 5 South Park episodes were pulled from streaming platforms, syndication, and online availability. Those 5 episodes are Super Best Friends from Season 5, Cartoon Wars Part 1 and Part 2 from Season 10, and episodes 200 and 201 from Season 14. As of today, those episodes remain unavailable on Paramount Plus, on the official South Park Studios website, and on every other major streaming platform. They were also omitted from the HBO Max streaming bundle when the show was on that platform. Episode 201 has Region 4 DVD release omissions as well, meaning that even the physical media releases in some regions don't include the full episode. These are, for all practical purposes, the banned episodes of South Park. They exist, they were made, they aired once. And then they were pulled from circulation and have never been officially made available again. 2 members of Revolution Muslim were later prosecuted for their roles in the threats. But the damage, in terms of precedent, was done. The message that was sent was clear. Threaten violence loudly enough and you can get content removed from the air, even from a show that had built its entire reputation on refusing to be silenced. Parker and Stone have never fully reconciled with what happened, and the 200 and 201 controversy remains the most significant test the show has ever faced. It's the one time where the outside world's response genuinely changed what viewers were allowed to see. Now let's talk about China, because the South Park versus China situation is both a separate controversy and a natural extension of everything we've just discussed. In season 23, which aired in 2019, there was an episode called Banned in China that criticized Hollywood's habit of conforming to Chinese government censorship standards in order to access the Chinese market. The episode depicted Winnie the Pooh, who has been banned in China because internet users had been using images of the character as a caricature of Chinese President Xi Jinping imprisoned in a labor camp alongside other characters. The episode was sharp, pointed, and very specific in its criticism of both the Chinese government and the Western companies that were willing to censor their own products to keep the Chinese market happy. The Chinese government's response was about as extreme as it could possibly be. They enacted a blanket ban on the entire South Park franchise. Not just the Banned in China episode, the entire show, every episode, every reference, every discussion. South Park was scrubbed from Baidu, which is China's primary search engine. It was removed from Douban, Jihu, and Bilibili, which are major Chinese social media and video platforms. It was wiped from Sina Weibo and WeChat. Search terms related to South Park were blocked. It was as if the show had never existed as far as the Chinese internet was concerned. Parker and Stone responded with a mock apology that read, in part, "Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts. We too love money more than freedom and democracy." The statement was dripping with sarcasm, and it referenced the NBA's own recent controversy involving a team executive who had been pressured to apologize for expressing support for Hong Kong protesters. The mock apology went viral and generated an enormous amount of media coverage, which once again had the effect of drawing more attention to the show and to the issues it was raising. The China ban remains in effect today. South Park is still entirely unavailable within mainland China. And the Banned in China episode remains available on Western platforms, which is notable because it means Parker and Stone didn't buckle under the pressure of losing access to one of the largest entertainment markets in the world. For a franchise worth billions of dollars, that's a meaningful financial sacrifice in the name of creative freedom. I want to pause here for a second and just acknowledge something. We've been talking about death threats, government censorship, international bans, and the suppression of artistic expression. These are heavy topics. They're important topics. And they're topics that I think deserve to be discussed seriously, even in the context of a show that also features a character named Mr. Hanky, who is literally a talking piece of poop. The fact that South Park can contain both of those things, the profound and the profane, the serious and the absurd, is precisely what makes it such a fascinating and important piece of American culture. It's a show that refuses to be just one thing. It's crude and it's sophisticated, it's silly and it's brave. It's a cartoon for adults that has had more impact on free speech discourse than most documentaries or serious dramas ever will. If you're still awake and you're enjoying this, consider subscribing. It really does make a difference, and there's still a lot more to cover tonight. Let's keep going. Let's shift gears and talk about something more uplifting for a while. Let's talk about the recognition that South Park has received over its 28 seasons, because for a show that has spent nearly 3 decades making powerful people angry, it has also won a remarkable number of awards and accolades from the entertainment industry. The show has won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards over the course of its run. 5 Emmys for a show that was once described by a television critic as the most vulgar program ever to air on American television. The Emmys have historically been somewhat conservative in what they recognize, especially in the animation category, so the fact that South Park has broken through that barrier multiple times says something about the quality of the writing and the cultural significance of the show. The most famous Emmy wins include the one for Make Love, Not Warcraft from Season 10, which is widely considered one of the greatest episodes in the show's history. That episode was filmed extensively using machinima techniques within the actual World of Warcraft game engine, with Blizzard Entertainment providing access and cooperation for the production. It has a 9.5 rating on IMDb, making it the second highest rated episode of the entire series. The Imagination Land trilogy from Season 11 also won an Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program in the 1 hour plus category, recognizing the ambitious 3-part story as something genuinely special within the world of animated television. Beyond the Emmys, South Park won a Peabody Award in 2005, which was given for distinguished and biting social commentary. The Peabody is one of the most prestigious awards in media, and winning it placed South Park alongside documentaries, investigative journalism, and serious dramatic television as a work of cultural significance. The show has also won the Critics' Choice Television Award for Best Animated Series, most recently in 2025. It received an Annie Award for Outstanding Writing in an Animated Production in 2013, specifically for the episode Chupacabra, which was written by Trey Parker. It won a Cable Ace Award for Animated Programming Special, or Series, way back in 1997, which was one of the first major awards the show received. In the show's very first season earned nominations from GLAAD, the Television Critics Association, and the Environmental Media Awards, among others. The Oscar nomination for Blame Canada from the 1999 film remains the show's highest profile award recognition. No Golden Globe or SAG Award nominations have been documented for the show, which isn't surprising given that those awards tend to focus on live-action programming, but the breadth of recognition across Emmy, Peabody, Annie, Critics' Choice, and Cable Ace categories speaks to the range of what South Park has achieved. Now let's talk about some specific episodes that I think deserve special attention, either because they represent creative high points for the show or because they contain facts and details that are genuinely surprising. Scott Tenorman Must Die from Season 5 is, as I mentioned earlier, the highest rated episode on IMDb with a 9.6 rating. It's the episode that transformed Cartman from an obnoxious bully into something much darker and more complex. The episode is a masterclass in plot construction, with a twist ending that genuinely shocked audiences when it first aired. It's the episode that people point to when they want to explain why South Park is more than just crude humor. If you've never seen it, and you're going to watch one episode of South Park, this is the one. Make Love, Not Warcraft from Season 10 is the second highest rated at 9.5. The collaboration with Blizzard Entertainment was unprecedented at the time. The machinima sequences, where the characters' in-game avatars are shown playing World of Warcraft, were animated using the actual game engine with Blizzard's direct cooperation. The episode captured something real about gaming culture in a way that felt affectionate rather than condescending, and it resonated with gamers and non-gamers alike. Return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers from Season 6 holds the third highest rating at 9.4. And on the other end of the spectrum, some of the lowest rated episodes include Going Native from Season 16, Royal Pudding from Season 15, Spring Break from Season 26, A Million Little Fibers from Season 10, and Jackovasaurs from Season 3, all of which fall in the 6.1 to 6.4 range on IMDb. Every show has its weaker episodes, and South Park's worst episodes tend to be the ones that stray too far from the main characters or lean too heavily on a single joke that doesn't have enough substance to carry a full episode. The single most watched episode in the show's entire history is the Season 1 finale, Cartman's Mom is a Dirty Slut, and its Season 2 continuation, which drew between 6.2 and 6.4 million viewers with an 8.2 Nielsen rating. That was absolutely enormous for Comedy Central in the late 1990s. In the modern era, the most watched episode is Got a Nut from Season 27, which pulled approximately 6.2 million cross-platform viewers over its first 3 days, making it the most watched South Park episode since 2018. There are also several episodes that I think are notable for pushing the boundaries of what the show's format can do. Good Times with Weapons from Season 8 featured extensive segments animated in a stylized Japanese anime format, which was a dramatic visual departure from the show's usual aesthetic. Major Boob Age from Season 12 used heavy rotoscoping techniques to emulate the look of the 1981 animated film Heavy Metal. Woodland Critter Christmas from Season 8 was narrated in a fairy tale style and involved satanic woodland animals, which is one of those episode descriptions that sounds completely insane until you actually watch it and realize it's even more insane than it sounds. And A Million Little Fibers from season 10 was a mostly standalone episode focused almost entirely on the character of Towley, which was a bold creative choice that didn't really pay off, hence its low ratings. The show's holiday specials deserve mention too. Mr. Hanky, the Christmas Pooh from season 1, introduced one of the show's most iconic and bizarre recurring characters. Pink Eye from season 1 was the first Halloween special featuring a zombie outbreak. Woodland Critter Christmas, which I just mentioned, has become a cult favorite among fans who enjoy the show at its most unhinged. The Black Friday trilogy from season 17 was a 3-episode arc centered on Thanksgiving and Black Friday that earned an Emmy nomination. And the Pandemic special from season 24 was an extended special that tackled the COVID-19 pandemic and also earned an Emmy nomination. The show's approach to serialization is another fact worth knowing about. For the majority of its run, South Park was almost entirely episodic. Each episode told a self-contained story that was resolved by the end, and you could watch episodes in any order without missing anything. But starting with season 18, the show began experimenting with serialized storytelling, where plot threads carried over from one episode to the next. Season 20 was the most heavily serialized season, featuring a single continuous 10-episode arc involving an internet troll called Skank Hunt, and a parody of the 2016 presidential election, with Mr. Garrison serving as a stand-in for Donald Trump. The serialized approach got mixed reviews from fans and critics. Some people loved the longer story arcs and the greater depth of character development they allowed. Others felt that the serialization undermined the show's greatest strength, which was its ability to respond quickly to current events with self-contained episodes that didn't require any prior knowledge to enjoy. Parker and Stone seemed to take the feedback seriously, because subsequent seasons dialed back the strict serialization and returned to a more hybrid format, where loose, season-long character arcs existed within episodic frameworks. Notable multi-episode arcs beyond season 20 include the Imagination Land trilogy, the Coon trilogy involving the boys as superheroes, the Cartoon Wars two-parter, the 200 and 201 two-parter, the Pandemic two-parter, and the various COVID specials that aired from 2020 through 2022. Each of these arcs allowed the show to explore ideas and storylines that were too big for a single episode, while still maintaining the sharp, focused comedy that defines the show at its best. The cultural impact of South Park extends far beyond the entertainment industry. The term South Park Republican was coined to describe viewers who aligned with the creator's generally libertarian, fiscally conservative, but socially liberal viewpoints. The show has been credited with influencing how an entire generation thinks about political satire, free speech, and the role of comedy in public discourse. The Everybody Draw Mohammed Day movement in 2010 was partially inspired by the show's censorship controversy, as people around the world organized to draw images of Muhammad as a statement against the intimidation that had led to the 200 and 201 episodes being censored. The show popularized catchphrases that have entered the broader cultural vocabulary. "Oh my God, they killed Kenny," and "You bastards," are recognized by people who have never watched a single episode. "Respect my authority" became a ubiquitous internet reference. "Screw you guys, I'm going home" is Cartman's signature exit line and has been quoted in contexts ranging from schoolyard arguments to professional sports interviews. Integrity Farms became a cultural shorthand for the cannabis industry after Randy Marsh's marijuana farm was introduced in season 22. And the Man-Bear-Pig saga, in which Al Gore is portrayed as the only person who believes in a creature that turns out to be real, became widely discussed as a parable about climate change denial after the show eventually acknowledged that Man-Bear-Pig was real and that Gore had been right all along. It's one of the rare instances of a show publicly and creatively admitting it got something wrong, folding that admission into the narrative itself rather than just quietly moving on. By the year 2000, just 3 years into the show's run, franchise merchandise had already generated over $250 million in retail sales. In 2011, Comedy Central partnered with Frito-Lay to sell 1.5 million bags of Cartman's cheesy poofs at Walmart stores. The extensive merchandise line includes t-shirts, toys, apparel, and collectibles available through the official South Park store and South Park Studios website. The show has been banned outright in several countries. Beyond the China ban we already discussed, the series was banned in India in 2010 by the Ministry of Broadcasting due to extreme vulgarity. It remained unavailable in India until Netflix acquired streaming rights in 2019, making it available again with an 18+ age rating. Various individual episodes have been pulled or censored in other markets around the world, and the video game The Stick of Truth had to be censored for release in Australia, Europe, and Israel. All of this adds up to a franchise that has been simultaneously celebrated and condemned, awarded and banned, praised for its brilliance and criticized for its vulgarity for nearly 30 years. And the fact that it continues to generate that kind of intense, polarized response is itself evidence of its cultural significance. Shows that don't matter don't make people angry. South Park has always mattered, even to the people who hate it. Now I want to take some time to walk through the evolution of the show, season by season, because one of the most interesting things about South Park is how much it has changed over the years, while still somehow remaining recognizably itself. The show you watch today is very different from the show that premiered in 1997, but the transformation has been so gradual and so organic that you almost don't notice it unless you go back and compare episodes from different eras side by side. The first season premiered on August 13th, 1997, and ran through February 25th, 1998. It introduced the boys and the core dynamics of the town, and the plots were wild from the very start. The first episode involved Cartman being abducted by aliens and getting an anal probe. Subsequent episodes featured volcanic eruptions, obesity schemes, a gay dog named Big Gay Al, an elephant-pig cloning experiment, a protest against the Canadian comedy duo Terrence and Phillip, a zombie outbreak for Halloween in an episode called Pink Eye, a Thanksgiving episode about turkeys, the introduction of Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh, the arrival of Damien the literal Antichrist, Barbra Streisand transforming into a giant mechanical monster called Mecha Streisand, and the revelation that Cartman's mom is, as the show delicately puts it, extremely promiscuous. And Kenny died in almost every single one of those episodes. That was season 1. 13 episodes of absolute chaos that established the formula the show would follow for years to come. Season 2 ran from April 1998 through January 1999, and it escalated the shock humor and celebrity parodies significantly. The season opened with the resolution of the Cartman's father cliffhanger, which, as I mentioned earlier, was delayed by the Terrence and Phillip Troll episode. Other notable episodes included the return of Starvin' Marvin, a sexual harassment lawsuit storyline, an episode about conjoined twin dyslexia, and a story about a prehistoric Iceman. The parental hypocrisy theme became more prominent, with the adults of South Park consistently being shown as more irrational and more dangerous than the children. Season 3 ran from April 1999 through January 2000, and it coincided with the release of the theatrical film. This season included the Chin Pokemon episode, which was a razor-sharp parody of Pokemon, and Japanese cultural export that remains one of the most quoted episodes of the early era. There was also a World War III storyline, a rainforest destruction episode, and the season finale featured a worldwide recorder concert. The satire of religion and cultural fads became more prominent and more confident during this period. Season 4, which aired in 2000, featured some truly memorable storylines. Kyle needed a kidney transplant, and Cartman offered to sell one of his for $10 million. Chef protested the town flag because it depicted a racist image. the boys formed a boy band called Finger Bang. Cartman's Trapper Keeper threatened to assimilate the entire planet in a parody of Akira. Towelie made his debut. The character of Timmy was introduced, bringing disability representation to the show in a way that was simultaneously offensive and oddly respectful. And the season ended with a very crappy Christmas, which was a meta episode about the boys making their own animated Christmas special. Season 5 in 2001 was where the show really hit its stride. This was the season that gave us Scott Tenorman Must Die, which we've already talked about extensively. It also gave us It Hits the Fan with its 162 uses of the word shit. Super Best Friends introduced the superhero team of religious figures that would later become so controversial. Butters' very own episode gave the character of Butters his first spotlight episode and hinted at the depth that the character would eventually develop. And the season ended with Kenny being killed off permanently in an episode called Kenny Dies, where he's diagnosed with a terminal illness. The tone of the show darkened noticeably during the season, with more complex plotting and more willingness to push characters into genuinely dark emotional territory. Season 6 through 10, covering 2002 through 2006, represented what many fans consider the show's golden age. This was the era that produced the Imagination Land trilogy, which was an ambitious 3-part story about the boys entering a world where every fictional character ever imagined exists. It was the era of Chef's departure in The Return of Chef following Isaac Hayes' exit. Make Love, Not Warcraft was in this period, as was Trapped in the Closet, the Scientology episode that ignited the feud with Tom Cruise and the Church of Scientology. The Cartoon Wars 2-parter tackled the Muhammad controversy head-on. A million Little Fibers tried an experimental Towelie-focused format that didn't quite work. And throughout all of these seasons, the show shifted towards sharper political and celebrity satire, moving away from the pure shock humor of the early years and toward something more pointed and more intellectually ambitious. Kenny returned permanently during this era after his Season 5 death, and the dynamic between the 4 boys settled into the configuration that would carry the show for the next 2 decades. Seasons 11 through 16 from 2007 to 2012 continued to refine the formula. The Imagination Land trilogy premiered during this period and won the Emmy. Margaritaville from Season 13 was a brilliant satire of the 2008 economic crisis that depicted the American economy as a religion, complete with faith-based spending and economic prayer. The Coon trilogy introduced the boys' superhero alter egos and expanded the show's mythology. Episodes 200 and 201 brought the Muhammad controversy to its peak. You're Getting Old from Season 15 was a remarkable meta-episode where Stan develops a condition that makes everything he sees and hears seem like literal garbage, which was widely interpreted as Parker's commentary on his own creative exhaustion and depression. The episode felt like a genuine emotional crisis rather than a comedy, and it remains one of the most discussed and debated episodes in the show's history. Randy Marsh shouted a racial slur on Wheel of Fortune in Season 11, which was a typically provocative South Park setup that led to a surprisingly thoughtful exploration of racial language and context. And the format began experimenting with hybrid episodic and arc-based storytelling. Season 17 through 20, from 2013 to 2016, marked a significant shift in the show's approach. Season 17 featured episodes about government surveillance in the wake of the Edward Snowden revelations. Season 18 introduced a more serialized format with plot threads carrying over between episodes. Season 19 brought PC Principal, who was initially introduced as a one-off antagonist, but was eventually promoted to a permanent member of the cast after the character resonated with audiences. The season was heavily focused on political correctness culture, and PC Principal became a surprisingly complex character who evolved from a villain into something closer to an awkward ally. Season 20 was the most ambitious and the most divisive. It featured a single, continuous 10-episode arc that wove together internet trolling, the 2016 presidential election, social media manipulation, and gender politics. Mr. Garrison served as a stand-in for Donald Trump throughout the season, and the show's prediction that Hillary Clinton would win the election forced a last-minute rewrite when Trump actually won. The heavily serialized format got mixed reviews, with many fans and critics feeling that the show worked better as standalone episodes rather than as a season-long narrative. Parker and Stone seemed to agree, and they pulled back from strict serialization in subsequent seasons. Seasons 21 through 23 from 2017 through 2019 saw Randy Marsh's gradual ascension to co-lead status. The Tegrity Farms storyline, which began in season 22, put Randy at the center of the show as the operator of a marijuana farm. The hashtag #MeToo movement, Fortnite, school shootings, vaping, and the China ban all became fodder for episodes during this period. By season 23, Randy was arguably the show's primary protagonist, and the dynamic had shifted from being primarily about the four boys to being equally about Randy's midlife crisis and increasingly unhinged behavior. Season 24 in 2020 and 2021 was completely disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Instead of a normal season of episodes, the show produced long-form pandemic specials. The pandemic special was an extended episode that addressed COVID directly, and the post-COVID and return of COVID specials imagined what the South Park characters would look like as adults in a post-pandemic world. The format was experimental, and the results were interesting if uneven. The long-form specials allowed for more character development and more complex storytelling, but they also lacked the rapid-fire comedy that made the regular episodes so satisfying. Seasons 25 and 26 from 2022 through 2023 marked a return to a more traditional format, though with reduced episode counts. Each season consisted of only 6 regular episodes, broadcast in the spring and supplemented by Paramount Plus exclusive specials later in the year. The episodes dealt with post-COVID school chaos, pajama day fights, streaming wars, AI, and parenting satire. The shorter season format meant less room for experimentation, but the individual episodes were generally well received. And then we come to the most recent seasons, 27 and 28, both of which aired in 2025. Season 27 consisted of 5 episodes that aired during the summer, featuring a highly serialized narrative centered on a caricature of Donald Trump in his second administration. The storyline depicted an abusive romantic relationship between Trump and Satan, which is exactly the kind of premise that only South Park could get away with. The season also featured parodies of Kristi Noem, J.D. Vance, and surveillance culture. Season 27 was originally scheduled to debut on July 9th, but was internally delayed to July 23rd. The 5th episode was delayed by an additional week, prompting that wonderful public apology about doing everything at the last minute. Season 28 premiered on October 15th, 2025, and ran through December 10th, 2025. The season followed the boys becoming obsessed with an internet meme, while a billionaire caricature of Peter Thiel investigated the meme as a potential antichrist cult. Trump and J.D. Vance conspired to secretly abort Satan's baby. PC Principal got into a physical fight with Jesus Christ over the state of modern Christianity, and Cartman underwent a Christian transformation arc. The season finale, called The Crap Out, drew 0.46 million viewers. That's 28 seasons, 338 episodes, and nearly 3 decades of continuous production. And the show is still going. The $1.5 billion deal, signed in July 2025, guarantees at least 50 more episodes at roughly 10 per year, securing the show through 2029 or 2030 at minimum. There's currently no series finale planned. South Park has never been canceled. It has been in continuous production since 1997, making it one of the longest-running animated series in American television history. And through all of those seasons, through all of those changes in format and focus and serialization, through the political shifts and the cultural changes and the technological evolution, the core of the show has remained the same. 4 kids in a small Colorado town dealing with absurd situations surrounded by incompetent adults saying things that nobody else on television is willing to say. That's the formula. That's what it's always been. And after 28 seasons, it still works. If you're still listening, I'm glad you're here. We're heading into the home stretch now, and I've got some more facts and stories that I think you'll find really interesting. Let's keep going. Let's talk about something that most people don't think about very much, but that's actually a really fascinating part of South Park's history, and that's the show's journey through the streaming landscape. Because the story of where you can watch South Park and where you can't, and how that's changed over the years, is its own little drama with twists and turns and corporate maneuvering that would honestly make a pretty good South Park episode. For the first chunk of its life, South Park was primarily a cable television show that you watched on Comedy Central, and if you missed an episode, you either waited for a rerun or you bought the DVD. The official South Park Studios website, which operates at southparkstudios.com and southpark.cc.com, has offered free full episode streaming for a long time, which was actually a pretty forward-thinking move by the show's producers. While other shows were fighting to keep their content off the internet, Parker and Stone recognized early on that making episodes freely available was good for the show's longevity and its audience. The show's first major streaming deal was with Hulu, where it was available from 2014 through 2020. Then in June 2020, it moved to HBO Max as part of a major deal that brought the entire catalog to that platform. And then things got interesting. In mid-2025, the series left HBO Max, which by that point had rebranded to just Max, and moved to Paramount Plus as its exclusive worldwide streaming home. New episodes now debut on Comedy Central with next-day availability on Paramount Plus. The transition wasn't entirely smooth. There was a window where the show was leaving one platform and arriving on another, and during that transition period, fans had to figure out where exactly they could watch the show legally. But as of now, Paramount Plus is the answer. That's where you go if you want to watch any episode of South Park that is currently available to stream. I say currently available very deliberately because, as we discussed earlier, there are 5 episodes that have been consistently removed from every major streaming platform. Super Best Friends, Cartoon Wars Parts 1 and 2, and episodes 200 and 201 are not in Paramount Plus. They were not on HBO Max, they were not on Hulu, they are not on the South Park Studios website. If you want to see those episodes, your options are limited to tracking down specific DVD releases, and even those are incomplete in some regions. Episode 201 has omissions on the Region 4 DVD release. It's a genuinely unusual situation where episodes of a major television show have been effectively erased from legal availability, and it's been that way for over 15 years. The home media situation for South Park is extensive. Complete seasons have been released on DVD from Season 1 onward, with the Season 1 DVD hitting stores on November 12, 2002. Blu-ray releases cover Seasons 1 through 11, with the Season 1 Blu-ray arriving on December 5, 2017. The Blu-ray releases are in HD remastered 16:9 widescreen format, which means they include those re-rendered versions of the older episodes that I mentioned earlier. The theatrical film was released on DVD on November 23, 1999, and on Blu-ray on June 30, 2009. The early DVD releases include special introductions recorded by Parker and Stone, and during the Season 3 DVD commentary, the creators admitted that they were extremely dissatisfied with the majority of Season 2. Which is a hilariously candid thing to say on the official DVD release of your own show. Now, let me share some scheduling facts that I think are genuinely interesting for anyone who has followed the show over the years. The show's broadcast schedule has changed dramatically over its run, and tracking those changes tells you a lot about how cable television has evolved during the same period. Seasons 1 through 7 followed a relatively traditional schedule, with episodes airing across fall and spring periods. Starting with Season 8 in 2004, The show adopted a split-season format where 14 episodes were divided into two 7-episode halves. The first half aired in the spring, there was a mid-season hiatus over the summer, and the second half aired in the fall. This format lasted through season 16 in 2012 and became the standard way that fans experienced the show for nearly a decade. Starting with season 17 in 2013, the show consolidated into a single continuous block of 10 episodes airing entirely in the fall, typically from the September through December. This format was more compact and allowed the show to build momentum across a shorter run of episodes. It also aligned better with the increasingly serialized storytelling that Parker and Stone were experimenting with during this period. The COVID-19 pandemic completely disrupted the schedule for season 24. Instead of a normal season of episodes, the show produced isolated special events. Only 2 episodes made it into season 24, both of them extended pandemic specials. It was the smallest season in the show's history by a significant margin, and it reflected the genuine difficulty of producing a show that relies on rapid real-time commentary during a period when the entire world was in a state of upheaval. Seasons 25 and 26 reduced the regular episode count to 6 per season, broadcast in the spring between February and March, with Paramount Plus specials filling out the rest of the year. And then seasons 27 and 28 in 2025 went to 5 episodes each, airing on a bi-weekly schedule with season 27 in the summer and season 28 in the fall. The standard broadcast time has remained Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern on Comedy Central throughout the show's entire run, which is one of the few things about the schedule that hasn't changed. There's also the interesting scheduling decision that Parker and Stone made regarding the 2024 presidential election. They stated publicly in September 2024 that they intended to delay season 27 until 2025, specifically to avoid parodying Donald Trump and the election. Given that the show had spent much of season 20 doing exactly that, and given the mixed reception to that heavily politicized season, the decision to step back from election coverage felt like a deliberate creative choice rather than a practical one. They didn't want to repeat themselves, and they didn't want to be defined by their relationship to presidential politics. Of course, when season 27 did arrive in 2025, it was heavily focused on Trump anyway, but at least they got some distance from the actual election before diving back in. The syndication history of the show is worth a quick mention. South Park has been syndicated domestically through Debmar Mercury, with CBS television distribution also cited in distribution credits. Internationally, it has aired on Comedy Central channels around the world, on SBS in Australia until 2020 and in various other markets. Some syndicated broadcasts have aired with TV 14 ratings on certain episodes, which is a step down from the show's standard TVMA rating, and presumably involves some editing to remove the most explicit content. All right, let me share some miscellaneous facts and deep-cut trivia that didn't fit neatly into any of the earlier sections, but that I think are too interesting to leave out. The fictional town of South Park, Colorado is modeled on the real South Park Basin and the Fairplay area in central Colorado. Fairplay is a tiny town at about 10,000 feet elevation surrounded by mountains. And if you visit it, you will immediately recognize the landscape from the show. The wide open valley, the snow-capped peaks in the background, the sense of isolation, it's all there. The show's aspect ratio and production quality have changed significantly over time. Seasons 1 through 12 were originally produced in standard definition 4:3. Starting with season 13 in 2009, the show has been produced natively in 16:9 high definition at 1080p. And as I mentioned, the entire pre-2009 catalog was re-rendered from archived production files to match the new HD standard. Here's a fun one. The show is animated, not filmed before a live audience. I know that sounds obvious, but the reason I mention it is that the traditional designations of single camera and multi-camera that are used to describe live-action sitcoms simply don't apply to South Park. It exists in its own production category, The creators have been remarkably consistent in their roles throughout the show's entire run. Trey Parker has directed 317 episodes. Matt Stone has directed 9 episodes and has increasingly shifted toward the coordination and business aspects of the production. Eric Stough, who has been with the show since the early days, directed 15 episodes between 1998 and 2002. Adrian Beard, who we mentioned earlier as the voice of Tolkien Black, directed 1 episode, and Tony Wirtz also directed 1 episode. On the writing side, Trey Parker is credited on 325 episodes, which is the vast majority of the show's entire output. Matt Stone is credited on 28 episodes as a writer. Brian Graydon, the executive who originally commissioned The Spirit of Christmas as a video Christmas card, has a development credit on 280 episodes. Notable staff writers have included David R. Goodman with 79 episodes, Nancy M. Pimentel with 56, Kyle McCulloch with 55, Erica Rivanoia with 17, Tim Talbot with 15, and Kenny Hotz with 11. But in practice, the show's writing has always been primarily driven by Parker, and the writing consultants function more as collaborators in the brainstorming process than as independent scriptwriters. The show currently airs on Comedy Central and streams on Paramount+. Before Paramount+, it was on HBO Max from June 2020 through mid-2025. Before that, Hulu from 2014 to 2020. The free streaming on the official South Park website has been available continuously. There are a few production challenges beyond the ones we've already discussed that I think are worth mentioning. The power outage that delayed the season 17 premiere in 2013 was a particularly memorable incident, because when your entire production process depends on everything going right during a 6-day window, losing power for even a few hours can throw the entire schedule into chaos. And the season 27 deadline miss in 2025, where the 5th episode had to be delayed by a week, prompted that wonderfully honest public apology that acknowledged the inherent risk of always working at the last possible moment. One detail about the voice recording process that I find particularly charming is the tradition involving children's voices. Toddler and kindergarten characters on the show have their voices provided by the small children of the production staff. So when you hear a little kid speaking on South Park, that's not a professional voice actor. That's someone's actual child who was brought into the studio because they happen to be the right age and they happen to be available. It gives those characters an authenticity that you can't really fake with adult actors trying to sound like children. The show has no official companion podcast, which seems like a missed opportunity given the massive podcast market and the amount of behind-the-scenes content that fans would love to hear. Parker and Stone have made occasional appearances at Comic-Con panels and other industry events, but they've generally been pretty private about their personal lives and their creative process outside of the 6 days to air documentary and occasional interviews. There are no spin-off series, no prequels, no sequel series, no live-action adaptations, no reunion specials. South Park is South Park, and it has never tried to be anything else. The franchise consists of the television series, the one theatrical film, the Paramount Plus specials, the video games, and the original shorts that started it all. That's it, in an entertainment landscape where every successful property is expected to spawn an endless series of spin-offs, sequels, prequels, and reboots. South Park's refusal to dilute itself with franchise expansion is refreshing. Parker and Stone have one show. They've been doing it for nearly 30 years, and they're going to keep doing it until they decide to stop. The financial scale of the operation is worth reiterating one more time because the numbers are genuinely staggering. The original $1.5 billion deal was signed in 2022, and the July 2025 extension brought the total commitment to even higher levels. To put that in perspective, this is for a show that started as a video Christmas card made for about $2,000. From $2,000 to $1.5 billion. That's the South Park trajectory. That's what happens when two guys from Colorado with a shared love of Monty Python and a complete disregard for the rules of polite society create something that nobody else could have created, and refuse to let anyone else control it. We're coming up on the end of our time together tonight, and I want to use this last stretch to talk about something that I think ties everything we've discussed into a single idea. And that idea is this: South Park should not still exist. By every reasonable measure, by every rule of how television is supposed to work, this show should have been canceled a long time ago. It should have burned out in the early 2000s when the initial shock value wore off. It should have been killed by the Scientology controversy. It should have been pulled off the air after the death threats. It should have faded into irrelevance when the culture moved on to newer, shinier things. It should have collapsed under the weight of its own production schedule, because no creative team should be able to sustain a 6-day turnaround for over 2 decades without the quality falling off a cliff. And yet here we are. 28 seasons, 338 episodes, nearly 3 decades of continuous production, still on the air, still generating controversy, still making people laugh and making people angry, often in the same episode, still being written and voiced and directed by the same 2 guys who made a crude little Christmas short in a college dorm room in 1992. That's not just impressive, that's borderline miraculous. I've been thinking about why that is, and I think it comes down to a few things that are worth reflecting on as we wind down tonight. The first is that Parker and Stone never stopped caring. That sounds simple, but it's actually incredibly rare in the entertainment industry. Most creators of long-running shows eventually hand things off to other people. They step back. They become executive producers in name only, while a team of writers and showrunners handles the day-to-day work. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly reasonable way to manage a creative career. But Parker and Stone didn't do it. They're still in the room every Thursday morning brainstorming ideas. They're still writing the scripts, they're still in the recording booth doing the voices, they're still pulling all-nighters on Wednesday to hit the deadline. After nearly 30 years, they haven't delegated the creative work to anyone else. The show is still theirs in the most literal, hands-on sense possible. And you can feel that in the episodes. There's an energy, a specificity, a point of view that comes from having the original creators still actively involved in every aspect of the production. It's the difference between a show that's being maintained and a show that's being made. South Park is still being made every single week by the people who invented it. The second thing is the production schedule itself. The 6-day cycle isn't just a logistical curiosity. It's a creative philosophy. It means that every episode of South Park is essentially a first draft. There's no time for second guessing. There's no time for committees to water things down. There's no time for network executives to request changes or focus groups to provide feedback. The episode goes from idea to broadcast in less than a week. And whatever Parker's gut tells him is funny on Thursday morning is what ends up on television the following Wednesday. That immediacy gives the show a rawness and an honesty that more polished shows can't replicate. You can hear it in the writing. The jokes don't feel workshopped. The opinions don't feel filtered. The emotional beats don't feel calculated. Everything feels like it's coming from a real place, because it is. There's literally no time to fake it. And I think that honesty is also why the show has survived so many controversies. When South Park says something offensive, it doesn't feel focus grouped or strategically provocative. It feels like 2 guys in a room saying what they actually think. You might disagree with them, you might be appalled by them, but you never doubt that they mean it. And audiences, even audiences who find the show's content objectionable, have generally respected that authenticity. There's a difference between a show that's offensive because it's trying to generate clicks and a show that's offensive because it genuinely doesn't care about the rules. South Park has always been the second kind, and that's why the controversies, as intense as they've been, have never succeeded in getting the show pulled from the air permanently. The third thing, and this is the one I find most interesting, is that Parker and Stone have always been willing to evolve. The South Park of 2025 is not the same show as the South Park of 1997. The animation has changed. The storytelling has changed. The targets of the satire have changed. The show has gone through phases of pure shock comedy, sharp political satire, serialized narrative experimentation, and character-driven drama. It has killed off major characters and brought them back. It has introduced new recurring characters and let old ones fade into the background. It has gone from being primarily about 4 kids to being equally about their parents. It has gone from episodic to serialized and back to a hybrid of both. Through all of these changes, the show has never felt like it was chasing trends or desperately trying to stay relevant. The evolution has always felt organic, driven by Parker and Stone's own changing interests and perspectives, rather than by market research or audience demographics. I think that willingness to evolve is ultimately what separates shows that last from shows that don't. A show that stays exactly the same for 30 years becomes stale. A show that changes too much becomes unrecognizable. South Park has managed to find a middle path, changing enough to stay interesting while retaining enough of its core identity to remain unmistakably itself. The boys still walk to the bus stop. Cartman is still terrible. Kenny still dies sometimes. The adults are still more foolish than the children. The animation still looks like construction paper. Those foundational elements haven't changed, and as long as they're in place, the show can go almost anywhere and still feel like South Park. There's also a creative lesson buried in the show's longevity that I think is worth drawing out. Parker has talked in interviews about the but/therefore rule of storytelling, which is the idea that scenes in a good story should be connected by but or therefore rather than and then. In other words, each scene should either complicate the previous scene or be a direct consequence of it. This is a basic screenwriting principle, but the way Parker applies it to South Park is instructive. Every episode, even the most ridiculous ones, follows a logical chain of cause and effect. Events happen because of other events. Characters make choices that have consequences. The chaos of the show is actually carefully structured chaos, and that structure is what gives even the most absurd episodes a sense of momentum and purpose. This principle applies to the show's larger trajectory as well. Each era of South Park exists because of the era that came before it. The early shock comedy led to the political satire because Parker and Stone realized they had something to say. The political satire led to the serialized experiments because they wanted to explore ideas that were too complex for a single episode. The serialized experiments led to the character-driven drama because extended storytelling naturally deepens characters. And the character-driven drama led back to a hybrid format because the audience wanted both depth and variety. Each phase was a therefore or a but in response to the previous phase. Nothing happened randomly. The show evolved because it was responding to its own history, and that's what gives its evolution a sense of direction rather than drift. There's also the question of legacy, which I think is worth addressing as we start to wrap up. What will South Park's legacy be when it finally does end? Because it will end someday. Parker and Stone have been doing this since they were in their 20s, and they're now in their mid-50s. The 2025 deal guarantees the show through at least 2029 or 2030, which would put them approaching 60. At some point, they'll decide they've said everything they want to say, or they'll simply run out of energy and the show will end. When that happens, what will people remember? I think they'll remember the fearlessness. South Park has spent nearly 3 decades saying things that nobody else was willing to say in a medium that most people don't take seriously. And it has paid real costs for that fearlessness. Death threats, international bans, banned episodes, lost business relationships, the departure of a beloved cast member. Through all of it, the show kept going. It kept saying what it wanted to say. It kept treating every topic, no matter how sensitive or dangerous, as fair game for comedy. That's not just entertainment. That's a genuine contribution to the ongoing conversation about free expression and the role of art in a democratic society. I think they'll remember the comedy. At its best, South Park is one of the funniest shows ever made. Scott Tenorman must die. Make love, not Warcraft. The Imagination Land trilogy, Margaritaville, Trapped in the Closet, Good Times with Weapons, Woodland Critter, Christmas. These episodes represent some of the sharpest, most creative, most consistently surprising comedy in the history of the medium. The show has made people laugh harder and more consistently than almost anything else on television, and it has done it while simultaneously making people think. That combination of comedy and substance is rare, and when it works, it creates something that stays with you long after the episode ends. I think they'll remember the music. From Blame Canada to the chef songs to the original scores of 28 seasons, the musical dimension of South Park has always been underappreciated. Parker is a genuinely talented songwriter, and the show's songs have ranged from catchy parodies to surprisingly emotional ballads to full-blown musical numbers that would be at home on a Broadway stage. Which makes sense because Parker and Stone did eventually end up on Broadway with The Book of Mormon, which won 9 Tony Awards and became one of the most successful musicals of the 21st century. That show exists because of the musical sensibility that Parker developed through decades of writing songs for South Park. The animated series was, in a sense, a 30-year rehearsal for one of the most acclaimed stage musicals of its era. And the musical talent has always been there from the very beginning. The Cannibal, the musical songs, The Spirit of Christmas, the Oscars-nominated Blame Canada, the Randy Marsh Lord parody, the Casa Bonita song. Music is woven into the DNA of the show in a way that doesn't get enough recognition. I think they'll remember the characters. Cartman is one of the great fictional creations of the last 50 years. A character who is simultaneously despicable and hilarious, horrifying and magnetic. A villain you root for even when you know you shouldn't. The season 5 episode that transformed him, Scott Tenorman Must Die, took a character who was already funny and turned him into something genuinely chilling, and the show has been exploring the implications of that transformation ever since. Butters is one of the most emotionally rich characters in all of animation, a genuinely sweet soul navigating a world that doesn't deserve him. His episodes, from Butters' very own episode to his various interactions with Cartman, contain some of the show's most emotionally resonant moments. Randy Marsh's transformation from Stan's embarrassing dad to the show's co-lead is one of the most interesting character arcs in television history. A slow-motion midlife crisis played out across 15 seasons that says something real about aging, masculinity, and the gap between who we think we are and who we actually are. And the dynamic between Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny. That friendship that persists despite everything. Despite Cartman's cruelty and Kenny's constant deaths, and Kyle's moral exhaustion and Stan's growing cynicism, that friendship is the beating heart of the show. Everything else, the satire, the controversy, the politics, the shock humor, all of it, orbits around that central relationship between 4 kids who have been friends since they were in 3rd grade and who, despite everything, still show up at the bus stop every morning. The show has never explained why they're friends. It has never tried to justify the relationship or make it make sense. They just are. They always have been. And the fact that their friendship survives everything the show throws at it, every absurd crisis, every moral catastrophe, every test of loyalty, is quietly one of the most hopeful things about South Park. In a show that is famous for cynicism, for tearing everything down, for refusing to believe in anything, the one thing it has always believed in, the one thing it has never satirized or undermined, is the friendship between those 4 boys. I think they'll also remember the production process. The 6-day cycle is genuinely historic. No other show in the history of television animation has done what South Park does week after week, year after year. The idea that a team of 70 people can create a fully produced, broadcast-ready episode of an animated television series in less than a week is remarkable. And the fact that they've been doing it for over 20 years without the quality consistently suffering is almost unbelievable. When the documentary 6 Days to Air showed the world how the sausage was made, it didn't diminish the show. It made people appreciate it more because they could see exactly how much effort and passion and creative desperation goes into every single episode. and I think they'll remember the impact. South Park has influenced comedy, politics, journalism, education, philosophy, and public discourse in ways that are difficult to fully quantify. It coined the term South Park Republican. It inspired academic books and university courses. It contributed to debates about censorship, free speech, religious satire, and the limits of comedy that are still ongoing today. It demonstrated that animation could be a vehicle for serious social commentary, not just children's entertainment or lightweight family programming. It proved that you could be both crude and intelligent, both offensive and meaningful, both funny and brave, all at the same time. That's a legacy worth celebrating, whatever you think of any individual episode or any individual joke. There's another dimension to the show's impact that I want to touch on because I think it often gets overlooked in discussions about South Park's cultural significance. The show fundamentally changed the economics of cable television. When South Park premiered in 1997, Comedy Central was a relatively minor cable channel. It had some programming, but it didn't have a flagship show. It didn't have a cultural event. South Park gave it both of those things overnight. The ratings from the first season were enormous by cable standards, and the advertising revenue and subscriber interest that the show generated helped transform Comedy Central from a niche channel into a major player in the cable landscape. Without South Park, Comedy Central's trajectory as a network would have been completely different. And without the model that South Park established, the idea that a single original show could anchor an entire cable channel's identity, it's possible that the golden age of cable comedy that followed, including shows like The Daily Show and Chappelle's Show and Reno 9/11, might not have happened in the same way or on the same timeline. The show also had a significant influence on the broader animation industry. Before South Park, adult animated comedy was essentially The Simpsons and a handful of imitators. South Park proved that adult animation could be faster, cheaper, more topical, and more provocative than anything The Simpsons was doing, and it opened the door for a wave of adult animated shows that followed. Family Guy, which premiered in 1999, was greenlit in a cultural environment where networks were actively looking for the next South Park. The same is true of Aqua Teen Hunger Force, Robot Chicken, and countless other adult animated shows that proliferated in the early 2000s. Not all of these shows were directly inspired by South Park, but they all benefited from the space that South Park had created in the market and in the audience's expectations for what an animated show could be. Parker's personal toll from the show's relentless production schedule is something that has been addressed on the show itself. The season 15 episode, You're Getting Old, is widely interpreted as one of the most autobiographical episodes Parker has ever written. In it, Stan develops a condition where everything he sees and hears seems like literal garbage. Music, movies, food, his friends' conversations, all of it registers as awful and meaningless. The episode was shocking when it aired because it felt genuinely bleak in a way that South Park episodes usually aren't. There was no comedic resolution, no lesson learned, just a kid standing in a world that had stopped making sense to him, unable to enjoy anything. Fans and critics immediately read it as Parker's confession that he was exhausted, burned out, and questioning whether the show was still worth making. The follow-up episode provided some resolution, but the emotional honesty of You're Getting Old lingered. It was a reminder that behind the jokes and the controversies and the billion-dollar deals, there's a human being who has been carrying the creative weight of this show on his shoulders for nearly 30 years. That's an extraordinary burden, and the fact that Parker has borne it while maintaining the show's quality and his own creative engagement is genuinely remarkable. There's also the question of whether the show has always gotten it right, and the honest answer is no. Parker and Stone would be the first to admit that. The man-bear-pig situation is probably the most prominent example. For years, the show depicted Al Gore's warnings about climate change through the lens of man-bear-pig, a creature that Gore insisted was real while everyone else dismissed him as a delusional attention seeker. The joke was clearly aimed at Gore's perceived self-importance. But the collateral damage was that it also mocked the concept of climate change itself. Years later, in season 22, the show revisited Man Bear Pig and revealed that the creature was real, had always been real, and that the townspeople's refusal to take the threat seriously had allowed it to become far more dangerous than it needed to be. It was a remarkable act of creative self-correction, an acknowledgement that the show had been wrong, folded into the show's own narrative rather than delivered as an external apology. Not many shows are willing to admit their mistakes. Even fewer are willing to make those mistakes a plot point. The show also, in its own strange way, demonstrated something about the durability of creative partnerships. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have been working together since 1992. Over 30 years. They've made shorts, feature films, a Broadway musical, video games, and over 300 episodes of television together. Creative partnerships that last that long are extraordinarily rare, partly because of the interpersonal pressures of sustained collaboration, and partly because people's interests and ambitions naturally diverge over time. The fact that Parker and Stone are still doing this together, still sitting in the same room brainstorming ideas, still recording voices side by side, still putting their names on every episode is itself a kind of miracle. Whatever their relationship looks like behind closed doors, the public-facing result has been one of the most productive and enduring creative partnerships in entertainment history. Now, I want to end tonight the way I think a South Park evening should end. Not with a big dramatic statement or a grand philosophical conclusion, but with something quieter, something that matches the tone of this time of night, when the world is winding down and everything feels a little softer and a little more forgiving. I've been talking for a while now, and if you're still awake, I want you to know that I appreciate your company tonight. These deep dives are some of my favorite things to make because they give me a chance to really sit with a topic and explore it from every angle instead of rushing through it. And South Park is a topic that rewards that kind of exploration. The deeper you go, the more you find. There's always another detail, another connection, another fact that changes how you think about the show as a whole. I could probably keep talking about South Park for another 2 hours and still not run out of interesting things to say. But this feels like a good place to start winding down. Before I do, let me leave you with one last fact that I think captures something essential about the show. In their Season 3 DVD commentary, Parker and Stone admitted that they were extremely dissatisfied with the majority of Season 2. They said this on the official DVD release of their own show. Most creators would never publicly criticize their own work, especially on a product designed to sell that work to fans. But Parker and Stone did it because that's who they are. They're honest to a fault, even when that honesty is directed at themselves. They don't pretend that everything they've made is great. They don't hide behind corporate language or diplomatic non-answers. If they think something they made isn't good, they'll tell you. And I think that self-awareness, that refusal to be precious about their own work, is another reason the show has lasted as long as it has. They're always trying to get better. They're always looking at what they did last week and thinking about how to do it better this week. After nearly 30 years, they still haven't decided that they've figured it out. The fictional town of South Park, Colorado sits in a wide valley surrounded by mountains. The snow falls there most of the year. The sky is enormous. The population is small enough that everyone knows everyone else. And the kids walk to school together every morning and wait at the bus stop in the cold, wearing their colorful hats and their winter coats, talking about whatever happened the day before. In the background, the mountains don't change. The seasons turn, the snow melts and falls again. And no matter what happens in any given episode, no matter how bizarre or catastrophic or offensive the events of the week might be, by the next episode, the town is back to normal. The bus stop is there. The boys are there. Life goes on. There's something comforting about that, especially late at night. The idea that a place can absorb that much chaos and still return to baseline. The idea that friendships can survive that much conflict and still hold together. The idea that a small town in the mountains can be the setting for every kind of story imaginable. From alien invasions to celebrity feuds to philosophical debates to toilet humor, and still feel like home at the end of it all. That resilience, that quiet persistence is maybe the most important thing about South Park. Not the jokes, not the controversies, not the awards or the bans or the billions of dollars. Just the fact that the town is still there. The bus stop is still there. The boys are still waiting. And tomorrow there will be another story. I hope you enjoyed tonight. We covered a lot of ground together, from the construction paper shorts that started it all, to the 6-day production miracle, to the voices and the characters and their histories, to the theme song and its 6 distinct versions, to the Oscars and the dresses and the acid, to the Scientology war and the Catholic League boycott, to the Muhammad saga and the death threats and the 5 episodes that remain banned to this day, to the China ban and the mock apology, to the video games that range from terrible to genuinely great, to the streaming deals and the $1.5 billion contract, to the season-by-season evolution of one of the most resilient and surprising shows in television history. That's a lot of facts for one evening. I hope some of them were new to you. I hope some of them made you smile. And I hope, if you've already drifted off somewhere in the middle, that the facts settled into your dreams in interesting ways. Maybe you're dreaming about construction paper right now. Maybe you're dreaming about a bus stop in the snow. Maybe you're dreaming about a Margaritaville blender or a talking towel or a kid in an orange parka who just won't stay dead. Whatever you're dreaming about, I hope it's good. Thank you for spending the evening with me. If you enjoyed it, subscribing really does help, and it means I get to keep making these for you. But for now, rest easy, sleep well,